Hello and welcome to the Pick Six podcast. I am joined by Tom Shatel, special guest.
Hi, everybody.
Woo. It's been like 6 months since you've been a part of
I
this.
know. Well,
and then Evan Bland over there.
Here again.
Evan Bland going to Ireland. Well, he'll be Evan O'Bland.
Evan O'Bland.
There.
that is great.
Jimmy isn't joining us because Jimmy thought that the podcast was going to start later. So Jimmy's not here. Jimmy disappointed us.
He's with Fred.
That's he was apparently he was talking to the head man in Nebraska basketball, Fred Hoiberg. Hello, everybody. I'm Sam McKewon. This is the Pick Six podcast for this week. We're recording on a Thursday. What is today? June 2nd?
June 2nd.
June 2nd. And so on June 3rd, they'll have a huge recruiting weekend with a bunch of luminary players and lots of stars that'll be joining and going down and watching the Friday Night Lights. They can't actually participate in it, but they can watch it. And so they'll be there. We're going to have a full recruiting preview about halfway through this podcast. At the front end, we're going to talk about some more general Husker topics. I talked to Nebraska Athletic Trev Alberts this week about a bunch of different things, one of which is some of the stadium renovations that may eventually happen. But we talked about Nebraska football and some other things that I haven't quite written about yet. Always an interesting conversation with him. Obviously, we talked about the Big Ten, which we'll get into here in a second. But the first thing I talked to him about a little bit was just football and the fact that so much has changed with this program. And you can almost go back 6 months. So today is June 1st. 6 months ago was January 1st, essentially, or December 1st. I don't know how that shit works, but anyways, 6 months ago.
Yes.
6 months ago, there was a program that had just finished its season at 3-9, and there was a lot of question marks about what the heck was going to happen. The only thing that we knew for sure was that Scott Frost was going to keep his job because that had been decided 2 weeks before. And so 6 months ago, we didn't exactly know where it was going to go. 6 months later, 5 new coaches, 30-plus new players. I'm not exactly how many. 15 transfers, and that doesn't include the JUCO guys, of which there are 3 of those. Mm-hmm. So 18 transfers, 15 from 4-year schools. That process didn't stop until Marcus Washington joined the team last week. 2 new quarterbacks. The other quarterback is gone. He's at K-State talking to The Athletic about how Nebraska didn't have the ability to huddle up and all these other things. And so the program has completely changed, but the head guy is still the same. And so I wanted to ask you, Tom, when you look at if you just look back on the long view of what's happened in the last 6 months and what could happen in the next 6 months, where do you think it stands right now?
It's unbelievable, right? Because when this thing started in 2018, we thought after 4 years this thing will be rolling. They'll be going to bowl games. He'll probably have won the West Division by now at least once. He's going to have his guys. He's going to have quarterbacks stacked up, which he does now. But it's the poster boy. The program, Nebraska football, is the poster boy for this era of NIL and the portal. And it's I think it's an interesting thing right now that people are talking about. Can you still build a program, or are you building a team?
Right.
And
a team being a year-to-year program.
Right. And I think most coaches would rather have the program in place, have the culture, the way they do things, and then just kind of dabble in the transfer portal. Use it to if they've got a hole here or there, use it for that. But this was almost a wholesale, change in a lot of ways. That's a lot of transfers. It just showed that it wasn't just a couple guys. They needed a lot. And how many can you really count on? I think at least half better show up and be really good. Sam, it's not the program is not where anybody thought it was. This is a quick fix, a Band-Aid. It needs to jumpstart the machine next year, and then we'll go from there. But it's almost the old story about you can't take too many JUCOs because you get on that cycle and you never get off it, because you always have to keep filling holes.
Right.
So where do they? Well, I guess we'll worry about that later. But where do they go after this? Do they have to keep going to the portal, or can they get off the merry-go-round and get back into the high school recruiting, which they're doing this week? But I always find this now very interesting. The Friday Night Lights concept, all that stuff is great, but how much does it matter right now in this world of the quick fix?
Your alma mater, Missouri, when you look back at their football program for like 2 decades, because they were really good, Dan Devine, and then they were really good there for about 20 years, and then they got kind of in the 80s and the 90s, and it felt like there was just kind of a new flavor every 4 or 5 years, and it was almost like they were what Nebraska is now. They were kind of scrambling to try to figure out an answer, and they couldn't quite figure it out. And then they finally did. I mean, they got the right coach, but it took a while. And when you look at Nebraska at this moment, does it feel like some of those programs that Nebraska used to just kind of beat because they were constantly changing and they didn't have an identity?
Yes, Missouri mismanaged what they had. And it was in the name of we're going 8-3, 7-4 back in the early 80s. That got you to a bowl game barely, but we want to win the Big 8. Well, winning the Big 8 back then was the Nebraska machine in the 80s was as good as anybody in the country, and so was Oklahoma. So, I mean, it was a noble idea, but you're throwing away what you have. So we're going to fire the coach because we don't like what we have.
Yep. Has
Nebraska done that? Yes, they have.
They did. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma in 2003.
Yeah.
Nebraska threw away what it had because it couldn't beat Texas and Oklahoma.
They've done it twice.
Yeah.
And with Bo also.
That's right. They couldn't beat Oklahoma.
They had the nine. They had the 9-win thing, and say what I did, and we all did about how those 9 games looked and what they but they had it and they wanted more. So if the old adage, and Missouri, if you're going to fire somebody, have somebody better, and they never did. In 70s I love this. This is like a little a silly trivia thing for old football guys. One of the guys who interviewed for the job in '78 at Missouri was Joe Gibbs. Lavelle Edwards.
He was a good coach.
Didn't get it. They hired Powers, who was good for him, but Joe Gibbs. He was in San Diego State. In '84, they fired Powers. They bring in Woody, who was anyway. One of the candidates was John Cooper. Wanted the job very badly. He was at Tulsa. Wanted the job very badly. Now I don't know Nebraska had those kind of choices on the table when they were hiring Mike Riley or Frost, but yeah,
Frost was the only choice.
What you're saying is true, and it's sometimes, and I think there's a lesson to be learned from that, and I think the Big Ten, which is very comfortable being the Big Ten, that's all they wanted to be out of life is the Big Ten, and maybe they could calm them down a little, Nebraska, but be happy with. People don't like that. Trev doesn't like that. He wants to reach high. But sometimes you gotta say, it's okay to have a year where you don't. I would think by now people would be ecstatic to go to a bowl game. So we'll see. I'm anxious to see the next time they go 8 or 9 wins, what the reaction is. Is it not good enough anymore, or is it? This is great.
I think it'd be. People will probably celebrate. Because you're getting into a younger fan base that doesn't have any experience of the 90s Huskers, Evan, when you look back over the last 6 months, if you were going to say here are the 2 or 3 most significant changes, the things that jump out at you that are going to be the most defining on the team going forward in the next 6 months, what are those 2 changes?
Well, I think it's the big ticket stuff. I think it's the assistant coaches that they hired, particularly Bill Bush and Mickey Joseph. I think it was some of the portal hits that they had, whether that was Casey Thompson. O'Shawn Mathis was certainly no guarantee. They put a lot of effort into that. And so I think, we're talking about the transfer portal. To me, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's so fortuitous that it hit when it did, because if this were the rules of 2 years ago, I mean, Nebraska would be in a bad spot with the misses that they've had in the recruiting classes, with the attrition that's gone out. And I know some of that's because of the new rules, but they would be in deep trouble. They'd be starting guys that are young, that probably aren't developed fully. And what they were able to do, I mean, again, you don't want to live in the transfer portal. You don't want 15 guys in every cycle. But they were able to address a lot of their needs in the immediate future for next year. And so it's just fascinating because, Sam, we talked about the whole red shirt thing before, about do you red shirt a guy, do you not? I think that argument's totally changed from when we started talking about it in 2019. In 2019, I absolutely thought red shirt those guys, and by the time they're fourth and fifth year guys, you want to get old, stay old, and that's where that advantage is going to pay off. Forget that. In this current climate, play the guys, man, because there's no guarantee they're going to be here next month, let alone next year. So it's been extremely fascinating to see the fluidity of the sport, of the program in the last few years. In a lot of ways, it felt like the changes that they made this offseason should have been made last offseason, so they would have had more leeway
That's a great
to let
point.
this stuff take hold. And so it does. It puts a whole lot of extra pressure, I think, on this year for those changes to mesh quickly.
Okay, so
That's
I
a
would
great
say
point.
the two biggest changes for me are specifically Mickey Joseph. Because A, he's a former Husker, and B, the way that he goes about his business is so different from so many of the other offensive coaches they had in the past that I think it's probably lit a fire under everybody. And the second is, okay, so the defensive front is a big deal to me. But I'd honestly say it's the recruiting department. I think the way that they've overhauled that has informed the way that they've gone into this June. And we'll talk about recruiting in a minute, but the amount of apparatus that is around the program right now is really, really changed. And I think that what Trev would say in talking to him, and we talked about a bunch of things on the record and off the record, is that A, a lot of these ideas were Scott's ideas. He knew that he needed to change something in the recruiting department. And B, that what a head coaching position has become today is not quite ball coach. It's not quite great play caller. Honestly, the NFL is more of the ball coach. And college has almost become more like a CEO, because until college programs sort of adjust to a GM head coach model, the head coach is kind of the GM. And the things that are going on in the collegiate scene require more overarching leadership than maybe even some of the stuff with the NFL. Because if you look at some of the NFL head coaches, some of the new ones, they're 34, 35, 36 years old, and they're basically, X's and O's gurus.
Right.
Sean McVay. I'm not saying that McVay and Zach Taylor aren't great leaders. I think they're probably good leaders, but I wouldn't put them in like the Belichick category. I would say that Zach Taylor is brilliant at X's and O's. I would say Matt LaFleur is brilliant at X's and O's, but I think when you're just talking about who leads the Green Bay Packers, I think Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers are basically on the same level. Like they're contemporaries. They're not.
They're people managers,
right.
And that's why Harbaugh didn't get the Vikings job, and he'll never be in the NFL again because he's old school. And they don't want old school. They don't want that. Players, GMs, owners don't want that. They will. Everybody follows the trend, and the trend is the guys like the new Vikings coach, and everywhere else should look.
It's Kevin O'Donnell, by the way.
Thank you. So anyway, I think what we're seeing is interesting.
Point is that the head coaching jobs in college have changed. That they have become different. Like it's not about who calls the best plays.
No,
it's who creates the best culture.
Consider that this is going on while Scott's trying to figure out how to be a head coach.
That's
period.
Right.
He didn't know how to do it. He thought. I mean, we all thought he was. Again, we threw him a giant parade before he coached a game. So he had a lot to learn, and while things are changing, while he's learning it, and he's learning against the league where there's some damn good head coaches.
Well, think about what's changed. I mean, you're talking about early signing period, one-time transfers, a pandemic occurred, NIL. I mean, it's insane how much it's changed since he took over in 2018.
And I think Nebraska, though, has a chance if he can get ahead of it or catch it and ride this wave and figure it out. You know, what you're saying, the recruiting part of the office and all that, you know, the portal and the scouting and a lot of those things. I think some of these Big Ten schools are kind of slow to adjust. I mean, Iowa and Wisconsin are not in a hurry to do anything.
No.
And it's just not, they're going to be slow. And Ohio State's not going to be slow. They're going to be fast.
They have,
but Nebraska has a chance to, so it's so important this year. You can't emphasize enough how important it is to win and keep him. If you think he needs to be kept, if he thinks he's the guy to lead you, sometimes it takes 7 years. I mean, it's stupid, right? It's crazy. But sometimes it takes a guy a while, and his ego got in the way. He was stubborn. He didn't know what to do. And so he waited too long to do these things, but he didn't know. And he didn't have a mentor. He didn't have anybody telling him what to be. You know, Bill Moose was not, he wasn't even there. So he's not going to tell him what to do. So who did he have to lean on besides his own ego or his own image of what he was or what he was? So I think, you know, things might be, you know, and like you said about Mickey. Trev loves him, and he's the guy you can build around. He's a leader. So win next year, keep it going.
Yeah.
You got to throw all this away. Maybe, you may not want to, but boy, they got to go to a bowl game, don't they?
Right. Yes. I think so. I mean, I think they do. I think that would be helpful, and it's possible that some of the infrastructure, if Scott, you know, isn't there, would remain in place, if that makes sense. I don't think that they're building all of this just for him. I think they want to build it to sustain Nebraska football in general. I'm talking about the recruiting operation and all that. Well, I think that, you know, that guy can work for a lot of different people. Let's talk. Go ahead.
Oh, and to be clear, when you talk about the recruiting stuff, are you talking what about the current setup makes it better to people who are curious?
Well, they got a little bit more staffing, and they hired 3 people here in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think a lot of it is just the way in which they're going to approach it, the strategy that they're going to use, which I think is to emphasize more the 500-mile radius and then the touch points where Nebraska's got connections and relationships. So if you look at, so Louisiana and Georgia, Nebraska's fortunate enough to have natural relationships in those 2 states, and those 2 states produce a lot of good players. And then there's Florida. Obviously, Sean Beckton is very, deeply embedded there too. But I don't think you're going to see a strategy that just says we're literally going to offer every single elite player who might be interested in us
450
no matter
a year.
where they're at.
Yeah.
And if anybody can look at what happened just recently with Tony Tuioti, I think he's probably a pretty good recruiter, but his recruiting strategy was to lean on the areas of the country where he is most familiar, which is California and Hawaii. And a lot of those guys will not come to Nebraska because a lot of them don't come east. They stay on the West Coast, they stay in the Pac-12, or they'll go to Texas or Alabama, maybe a couple of those programs. But you can look at the commit lists of every Big Ten program, and you're not going to see a lot of West Coast linemen coming here because they don't. And so part of what happened is a couple of the guys that he signed are real flyers, and you know this because you cover recruiting. Mm-hmm. Jalen Weaver is a flyer. I mean, he's a big guy, but real question marks about whether he could play at the collegiate level, his conditioning ability. Brody Tagaloa is a borderline Power 5 player, not sure you're going to take. The guys that were not borderline and were like, we're going to take these guys, they didn't commit to Nebraska. And so I think Tuioti left. He's at Oregon, and he can get all those guys there. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to get them here. And so I think you have to be really honest about, the solution to every problem can't be all. That goes for the playbook. That goes for the recruiting strategy. That goes for all those things. Minnesota football is maybe the most boring program in Power 5. I'm not kidding. Look at their offense. They run about 7 plays. It's boring as hell, and they've beaten Nebraska 3 times in a row.
They hold the ball.
And 2 of them weren't even that close.
Who does that remind me of?
It kind of
Nebraska football.
a little bit.
3 running plays.
The difference being that, like, Tom Osborne was regarded as a genius on offense, and so, like, he could do all kinds of things. And he had trick plays and all this other stuff. But it is very similar. And I think the reality is that even though PJ Fleck has the kind of team that'll lose 14-10 to Bowling Green and 13-7 to Illinois, he also wins some games that he shouldn't, and he won 9 last year. And Nebraska would take that in a heartbeat. And I think part of the challenge is you've got to stop pretending like being as complex as possible is the solution. It has to just be what works and what wins.
Well,
that's hard.
That's what is happening right now, and if you want an accurate description of where the program is right now, Trev is trying to build it from the bottom up, and he wants to do it right, and that's what this year to me is all about. It's about winning. You got to go to a bowl game, but it's about showing Trev that this is a football program going forward that is going to win in modern-day college football. And it starts with the fundamentals, the culture, holding people responsible, accountable for doing things the right way all the time. I don't want sloppy stuff. It's got to be done the right way. And, Mickey Joseph plays into that. So does Whipple. So does the recruiting apparatus and the way they're going to do all that stuff. It's got to be you got to show Trev this is a football program that is going to win. It's going to hold up. It's going to fit into the way that the game is changing, and I think that's what this year is all about. Now, again, winning is a big part of that. But I just think Trev has an idea in mind. We need to start from scratch and build something in this league that is going to hold up and is going to be better than others. But that starts now.
Agreed. Let's talk a little bit about Big Ten, and then we'll go to Nebraska football recruiting. So the Big Ten presidents and the athletic directors meet next week. The athletic directors met the week before. I still don't think there's anything imminent as it relates to whether or not they're going to scrap divisions. I think some of what's going on is tied into the Big Ten TV negotiations. Did either one of you guys see the conversation that John Orand, I think is how you say his name, from Sports Business Journal had about what potentially might happen with Big Ten TV contracts?
Yes.
So did you see it?
A little bit of it.
Okay, so it was basically that the Big Ten would spread its contract between 3 TV networks. And, Fox in the morning, CBS in the afternoon, NBC at night. Now, I don't know if NBC is that third network or not. NBC obviously carries Notre Dame football. But, I mean, that would be interesting. Because the network he didn't name there was ABC ESPN. And is it possible that the Big Ten would walk away from the opinion-making of ABC ESPN?
Yes, because the Big Ten does what the Big Ten wants,
yeah.
And they are the Big Ten, and maybe they want. There's, obviously ESPN is the SEC network. Would you want to align yourself with the SEC? Because we all think that those 2 leagues are going to run the sports. Right. In a few years, because they'll have the most money,
right,
the most power. So would you want to be with them, or do you want to be opposite them? I can't answer that. But the idea of being a 3 is, I think it's absolutely brilliant if you can dominate the whole day. Now, some of those games, like I watch, turn on college football on a Saturday, and I'm not trying to run anybody, but they've got Wisconsin Purdue on at 11 o'clock. I don't want to watch that. It's a bunch of punts. I mean, it's not interesting football, and so there's a lot of those games in the Big Ten.
2 9-win
like
teams
that.
right there, though.
Well, that part's interesting, especially for Nebraska. You'd love to be that interesting, wouldn't you, or that dull?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, you've got to produce, but that's where the divisions going away comes in.
Yeah.
You're able to be more flexible, and that's where Nebraska is going to get chosen a lot, because they win or lose, they're kind of like the Dallas Cowboys. People love to watch them. The ratings are good, so you'll see more Nebraska versus East Coast, Penn State. You get Nebraska versus Rutgers on the East Coast game, Ohio State, Michigan. But maybe that means more of those teams coming into Lincoln, like Penn State, who has only been here once since the Big Ten joined, and Michigan, which has been here twice. So I think it's very interesting. Will it happen? It could.
Yeah, there's so many unknowns there. I mean, I like the idea of spreading out the Big Ten brand throughout the day. If you have three, you're playing all day on 3 different networks. I don't know contractually or monetarily if that would increase the payout that the league would get and that the schools would get.
Well, that's why they would do it.
Yes.
They would do that for the
significantly?
$1 billion.
Okay.
And somebody, I forget who it was, told me that we're also looking at Amazon and some of those.
Yeah, Apple TV. There are all kinds of other platforms.
Those things are also going to be part of it. So there's going to be all kinds of stuff going on. You'll be able to watch football any way you want to.
Mm-hmm.
I've just got to figure out before the Chargers and Chiefs play how I get to watch Amazon Prime or the NFL games on Thursday nights this fall are going to be on that streaming service, and I've either got to find a sports bar that has that, or I got to figure it out at home.
The divisions part's interesting though too, because obviously the Pac-12 jumped right on that right away. No more divisions.
Well, they have one team. They have one team out there, and it doesn't matter who the rest of the teams are. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just it's interesting that the Big Ten hasn't said anything about it. It's been a few weeks.
Let's be clear too. Oregon made a push to be a national brand. Obviously, when they played for the national title in 2010, they're not a national brand. They're not, and they've had every opportunity to become that. And you know what has happened? Every single coach has left there. Taggart left there. Mario Cristobal left there. Dan Lanning, who I think is going to be a really good hire there, but if an SEC job opens up, he's going to leave there too. Mm-hmm. Coaches leave USC. I'm sorry, the coaches leave Oregon. They get fired from USC. They leave Oregon.
Right.
And so Oregon is not a national brand, unfortunately, and USC is. And the difference is that like what they want to try to create out there is every opportunity possible. If Utah, which is a really good football program but not a national brand, beats USC, they still want to be able to pair USC and Utah. They don't want to knock USC out of it because Utah beat them or Utah beat them. I mean, Utah is the other team down there. Mm-hmm. In the Big Ten, it's more challenging because I would say there's at least 3 national brands and there's probably 4 mid-tier brands. Your 3 nationals being Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. And then your mid-tiers being Nebraska, Wisconsin, which I think has earned that right. Then I would probably put Michigan State in there as a mid-tier brand, and then I would probably say Iowa because they've done quite a bit. I think the Pac-12 has USC as a top-tier brand, then Washington and Oregon and UCLA in the mid-tier, and that's about it. Maybe Stanford, but Stanford's fallen off.
I think the Pac-12 did that to get attention.
Smart.
Don't forget about us. Everybody always forgets about us, but we're going to be first. I think the Big Ten is going to scrap the divisions, but they're very deliberate in everything they do. The playoff isn't going to change for a while, no matter what Sankey's saying down there in Birmingham about going to 8 or going to this or having their own playoff. Everybody's waiting for the media rights, the TV money to be doled out. So there's no hurry. They can do another year with those divisions, and Ohio State's going to win, and they'll get one team in the 4-team playoff. So there's no hurry to do it, but it seems to me the sentiment is that that's the way they want to go. And if you're TV, that's what you want. You want a championship game with all the brand names playing. You want your top 4 or 5 teams, and to have a chance to go to the playoff, and you're going to pick 2 of those to play in the big game. So you're always going to get somebody really good. Doesn't mean it won't be Wisconsin or Nebraska, but a lot of these championship games have been hard to watch. They're just not good. And it's a mismatch, and it makes the league look bad. To be honest, it looks like, well, these guys can play and these guys can't. Well, why not put them all together and try to develop a pool of playoff contenders, 5 or 6 teams where every year they're going to have a chance. And then you build up your national brands that way. These guys are playoff contenders. And I'm not saying 6 are going to get in. Certainly they're not. But you can get, on an odd year, you can get 3 in. If you got 12 teams, you might.
I think the Big Ten would expect to get 3 in every year.
And then you also,
they won't, but they would expect.
If you have the championship game and the loser could fall out of the playoff, right? Because they just lost a game.
Right.
And then the third place team comes up and replaces them. So when you have divisions, it's harder to do that. When it's all one and you've got teams that are tied or they look kind of similar, here we go. That's my opinion. And I think it'll happen. And I think it should happen. You know, Nebraskans are worried about Nebraska, of course, but they should be looking at how can we, if the Big Ten's better in football, it helps us. So the Big Ten, the 12-team playoff helps the Big Ten. Not having divisions helps the Big Ten. And
I think the reasonable question that a Nebraska fan would have is, how is Nebraska ever going to go to the college football playoff if they're never one of the top 2 teams in the league? And if one of the top 2 teams in the league is always Ohio State, and the other top team is either Michigan or Ohio or Penn State, how does Nebraska ever make it?
Well, they always were in the Big 8 and Big 12. But now they got to get back up there.
Right.
They got to get back.
I think the argument is, well, they can't. There's just.
I think that's a silly. I think that's a silly argument. I think you can. Nebraska can do anything they want to, but it's just been so long since they've been a competent football team.
Right.
They beat Michigan. What? I've seen at least one game in Ann Arbor where they won that game. They can beat them. They can beat Michigan State. They can beat Penn State. They got to beat Ohio State. Well, go build that team. Go be that program. I think they can do it, but it's harder to do when you're shooting to win the Big Ten West. That's your aim is to be the best of the West. Well, the best of the West is often middle of the pack. If you put them all together, aim for the top, not halfway. Does that make sense?
Yes. What if they had 7 games that they scheduled, and then they spent the last 2 or 3 weekends doing a tournament?
You mean, like, well, how would you do a tournament? I mean, you're going to schedule your games. So,
like they had an 8-team tournament at the end, and then the other teams just played each other. There was like a round robin.
But
you played 7 games. You see who the top 8 teams are. Then those teams kind of play off against each other. Or you have 6 games, and then you see who the top 8 are. Those teams play off against each other. The other 6 teams play their 3 games by playing one another.
Sort of like we saw in 2020 when they matched up.
ADs like to have things planned out for home games and the merchants and the community and the fans, and they like to know where they're going to be. Otherwise, I think that's kind of cool. Yeah. It's like a flex schedule.
It's a flex. I mean, I think the SEC could try that. I think the SEC is going to be staring down the barrel very soon of a situation where everybody's looking around and going, okay, the whole thing where Alabama and Georgia win all the time, that was good in 2020 or 2019. It's no longer good that Oklahoma and Texas are here, and they're no longer the kings of the league. We've got to find a way for those teams to all play each other.
The SEC wants it now because ESPN would get it all, and that would make ESEC better than it.
But you could have both. Like you could have an SEC tournament.
Right.
They have 16 teams, 8 go into the losers bracket, and they fart around over here, and then 8 go into the winners bracket. That's the last half of their season, and then they go into the college football playoff. I think it would work in the SEC.
Probably
in the Big Ten.
I don't think half the teams in the SEC aren't really that good.
That's right. They go into the losers bracket.
Right.
That's the point.
But
they go over here and play.
Do you want your top teams beating up on each other though, and hurting your playoff chances?
Well, the point is that the top 2 or 3 teams in that little 18 playoff would go to the playoff. They'd be like, "Oh, there you go." And it'd be a ratings bonanza. I would watch the hell out of that.
Yeah.
I'd watch it in the Big Ten.
As somebody that's been in the Big Ten 10 years, I'm not married to anything in the Big Ten. I don't care when any of the games are. It's kind of cool to have Ohio State, Michigan on the last weekend. If they moved that to October, I wouldn't bother me one bit. I really honestly don't care when Nebraska's games are, or if they take these divisions away. Who cares? I don't care about the divisions. They're not sexy. They're not really that interesting to me. It's just kind of the same thing every year. Jump it up a little bit. So
let me just present it one more time. So you have 9 games, 3 of which are non-conference, and then there's 6 conference games. 6. After 6, you have the top 8 teams. You should be able to figure that out. You might have some carping and moaning down between 8 and 9, but you can have a reasonable tiebreaker. And I'm serious. It'd be like a team that was 3-3, right?
Sure.
So it wouldn't be like, oh, that's not fair. They weren't going to the playoff anyway. The top 8 teams in the Big Ten with the tiebreakers down at the bottom, they all play a tournament in the last 3 weeks of the season. Let's say Ohio State's the number 1 seed. The number 8 seed in that particular scenario is Northwestern. Then 2-7, or whatever. You know what I'm saying. 2-7, 3-6, 4-5, whatever. Then they play a little mini tournament. And then the last game is the Big Ten championship. Right? The last one. And there you go. And then the other 6 teams play in kind of a loser's division. And the good thing about that, if we're honest, is that you might be able to pull a bowl team out of that. Because maybe you get a team that, they play the 3 worst teams in the league, and well, what do you know? They ended up 7-5, and they can go to a bowl. And maybe that team is Nebraska. Nebraska's the 9 seed, and they get to go play. There's a round robin down there, and they play a little losers bracket tournament. Now, wouldn't you watch the hell out of that 18 tournament halfway through the season? Let's say that 18 tournament starts on November, the first weekend of November, and you play the 3 weeks after that, and and then you play your games and.
I would, yes,
the SEC
but
can do that, and I think they might do it.
I think the thing that holds that back though is if it's all about inventory, right? You hear that term all the time, TV inventory. You're making those games really interesting, and those ratings are going to be sky high. But those other ones essentially become early December bowl games.
Yes, they're also rans, no question.
But nobody cares about that, and I think that's the other thing about scrapping divisions that's interesting to me is that the teams at the top, that's compelling, but if you're Nebraska in the current setup, if you're Northwestern in the current setup, late October is interesting. There are stakes, there are things to play for. If you scrap that and you go to just the top teams, what does it really matter at that point? You're 3 games behind Ohio State, you're 2 back of Michigan, you have no chance of catching up. There's no postseason chance at all. I just think that dilutes your inventory in the name of, what, maybe having another college football playoff team, maybe juicing up your conference championship week. But to do that all at the expense of the heart of the season in October and early November, to me, I don't know.
Fair.
I think it dilutes the overall product.
I'm saying that splitting the thing up gives you a little bit of incentive.
Well,
that's my point.
I think what you're thinking is, I think it's interesting. It could happen in the SEC. It'll never happen in the Big Ten. Big Ten, here's why. The axe, the bucket, all that stuff.
You still play those games. You just don't play them when
but if you got to be a flex, I mean, every one of those games get played. I mean, there's a lot of them.
You could, in theory, front load those games and put all Minnesota, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, all that. That's front loaded here, and then you got your little 18 tournament. I think the SEC could actually pull it off. They could actually say, and just imagine what that 18 tournament would look like. It would be Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas, LSU, Texas A&M, Florida, and Tennessee. There's your top 8 teams. Holy crap.
It'd be great.
And then the other 8 teams are, Mississippi State and Arkansas and Ole Miss and South Carolina and Vandy. And every so often, Arkansas would be a 5 or something like that. But, you want to talk about a ratings bonanza. That would be incredible. I think you could do something similar in the Big Ten. The challenge is, and I think Tom makes a really good point here, is that the Big Ten has not done a good enough job, and part of this is because of the divisions, of building the process out beyond Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. They've got to get better at building Iowa up. Iowa's been a much better program over the last 5 years than Penn State. But they don't do a very good job of explaining that. You know, P.J. Fleck is a commodity. They don't do a very good job of explaining it. All right, let's go to recruiting here. Big recruiting weekend for Nebraska. I'm going to kind of set the table, and then you guys can talk about it. They're probably going to have 12 to 13 visitors. There's two kind of groups. You've already written about the in-state guys, 2 of whom are commits, 3 of whom are not commits. Malachi Coleman, Mav Noonan, and Brock Knutson. Nebraska wants all 3. Then you've got this group of players over here who are from out of state. A lot of them are receivers. 3 of them are Omarion Miller, Barry Jackson, and Joshua Manning. And then you have 2 pass rushers, Adonijah Green and Ashley Williams. You've got an offensive lineman in Amir Herring. You've got a running back in Dontavius Braswell. And I can't remember. I think there might be one more that I'm for some reason forgetting. But it's a pretty interesting group of players. A lot of guys from Georgia, a lot of guys from Louisiana. Makes sense, right? And then a lot of guys from the in-state Nebraska. Mm-hmm. As you think about the names, and you wrote about the in-state guys, where's your priority list?
Well, we talked about the recruiting setup earlier, right? And the focus on the 500-mile radius. So to me, that's where it starts. I mean, you want to nail down those in-state players, and you know, like you said, I wrote about Malachi Coleman, Brock Knutson, and Mav Noonan. And what's interesting, what those 3 guys have in common is a couple things. One, they grew up around Nebraska. They grew up in Husker families. They've been to campus dozens of times for practices, unofficials, all this kind of stuff. But the other thing is that this is their probably last best chance with Nebraska before they go off to all sorts of other places around the country for official visits in the month of June. And so that's sort of what this weekend is for them, is to confirm what they know. It's not about having their eyes open to, you know, this oasis in a cornfield or anything like that. It's about kind of confirming, yeah, these relationships are what we thought they were. Hey, I met this Husker player 2 months ago, and now I'm going to see him again. What's that like? What are the coaches like in person after we've been exchanging texts and 5-minute phone calls daily for months? You know, how does that go? So I think that's where you start. You give those guys plenty of attention, and then, you know, kind of like you said, there's the Mickey Joseph factor with a lot of this. A lot of those the players who are coming in, Omarion Miller. Yeah. Was an LSU committed to essentially to Mickey Joseph, right? Yeah. So like that's a guy
that could go,
that you feel like pretty good about.
So one of the things we do in recruiting is we always ask, okay, who's your top teams? I always listen for that because it gives you a sense. Mm-hmm. His top teams are Tennessee, Arkansas, Colorado, Nebraska, and one other team.
All over the place.
And Oregon just offered. Well, that's interesting. And I'm like, yeah, Nebraska can win that.
Which is to say nobody's his top team.
Michigan, Alabama? No, Nebraska's not going to win that. So then Barry Jackson was like, oh, my top teams are like Mississippi State, Western Kentucky, Louisville, Pittsburgh. Nebraska could win that. Mm-hmm. Like, you kind of know. So Amari Miller's really good, but I don't know that he's like really tied hardcore to anybody but Mickey Joseph. Mm-hmm. Like, I just don't. I think this kid plays in a tiny town in Louisiana up by the Texas border, and I think Mickey went up there and recruited him. I think he's got a really good recruiting profile because he's a spectacular player, but I don't. You got to drive up there. You can't fly there. It's like 4 hours away from Baton Rouge, 3.5. I think Nebraska's got a real shot at getting this guy. And some of it's just because Mickey's a better recruiter than a lot of people. So, like, if you're going to go get him, that's why it was Arkansas, Tennessee, Colorado, Nebraska, and one other team. And in a couple of those cases, it's because Arkansas coaches can drive there. Mm-hmm. It's closer to I think it's closer to the University of Arkansas than it is to LSU.
The other thing, big picture, I think for what it's worth, is that, and Miller may be the exception here, but I don't think you'll probably get a lot of immediate commits out of this weekend just because this is the start of official visit season. And that's sort of the new, process or trend now, is not necessarily to take your officials during the fall when the games are, but like you see it all over the country now. Guys are taking their officials in June when they have the focus of the staff, when they don't have to worry about their own seasons because of the early signing period. All of that comes together. And so I think this is the weekend where, in a month or 2 or 3 months, you look back and say, man, they planted a lot of seeds that bore fruit down the line. But I think this is when you start that process. Is you get them on campus now and hope that holds up in a few weeks.
I think it's a pretty big recruiting year, and because I think it's, again, we're looking maybe at the beginning of, if there's a second act to the Scott Frost era, this is the beginning of it. And I think, where it's easy to say, boy, the transfers are where it's at, and that's how you get better. That's how it's going to go going forward. You can't fall into that trap. You've got to still have a base of high school kids. You got to develop them. Yeah, they might leave. A lot of these kids you bring in and sign might leave in a couple of years, but you still got to try to have that base, the foundation of guys who are hopefully going to stay 3 or 4 years. So I think, and you've got a half a new staff, and I think it's a very big year for that. I think just to show that, okay, going forward, this is different, but we still care about recruiting.
Well, they're not going to have to duplicate the transfer thing they did. I think they do want to, go back to high school guys. I don't think Scott Frost is the biggest proponent of the transfer portal. I think they had to do it this year. I don't think they had much of a choice.
No, they didn't. But I'm saying, don't fall into that trap where that's where you lean on every year.
I don't think they want to fall into it.
No, I agree.
But they had recruited so poorly, and I mean it. They recruited poorly. I think part of the thing that Vince is there to do is to put a kind of quality control aspect to it, and not turn it into, hey, not every 4-star, just because you can get a 4-star guy,
an offer and you get an offer and you get an offer.
I think you have to really think hard about who are the guys that have become really good football players within Nebraska's program in the last 5 years, and in many guys, those guys are Luke Reimer, Nick Henrich, Garrett Nelson, Austin Allen. Guys that are from the state of Nebraska. Those are some of the best players on the team. Cam Taylor-Britt was one of the best players on the team. Wasn't that highly recruited.
Right.
Was kind of a quarterback in high school, some other things. He was a guy that I think has kind of maximized his talent. DeAndre Thomas, Damian Daniels from Oklahoma and Texas. They kind of came up here. Those players made something out of themselves. DiCaprio Boodle, who was a kind of a low 3-star corner, who came up here and stayed, and all those things. So if you start looking at the players who have really hit here, it's not a lot of 4 stars. It's not a lot of 4 and 5 stars, because a lot of times 4 and 5 stars who come into Nebraska aren't necessarily the guys that you kind of wonder a little bit about whether they're going to make it. And a lot of the 4 stars who have come here haven't made it here. They've left.
But does that inform your strategy moving forward and say this is the kind of guys that we need to get, or does that say we because you can't just give up on the 4 stars, right? Like,
no,
the
but
talent
I think you can
is going
talk
to be
more
what wins.
about, okay, where are we going to get our 4 stars from, and where are the players going to be from, and why aren't we hitting in Kansas City? You got to get local. You got to do better in Missouri and Iowa and Wisconsin and Illinois. They're recruiting more in Illinois now, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, those areas. I think you have to go to the Big Ten footprint and stop. I just think it's harder now than it used to be to get West Coast kids, for one thing. And I think you have to think about, what kind of player fits here. Are they used to it being cold? Are they used to it? Those are questions that Nebraska's going to have to navigate. And you feel better when it's Mickey Joseph who's coaching them, because, Mickey's going to kind of keep things, he's going to keep on them.
Right.
You feel kind of the same way with Travis Fisher, but again, they've lost a lot of defensive backs. They're just, let's be honest, they've missed on a lot of guys. And Fisher's a good recruiter, but Henry Gray and Jaden Francois and Ronald Delancey and Nadab Joseph and Malik Williams, and those are misses. They all left and they didn't play.
And you have to hope that they didn't. There aren't a lot of misses on these transfers.
Agreed.
And how many? What if they all leave? I mean,
that ups the stakes. If you miss on recruiting, you don't feel it for a couple of years. If you miss on the transfer guys, you're going to see it right away.
I don't think
season.
they missed on many of them. I think they're going to be pretty good.
I
really do.
I agree.
I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna.
One
of the question marks for me is actually quarterback.
Absolutely. How good is he?
Yeah.
How good is he?
Are they? I don't know that it's settled, that it's just the one guy.
But he doesn't have to be great.
He doesn't.
None of them have to be great. They have to be good. They can't be average.
But how good can you be if you have the same line that Adrian Martinez operated
Well,
last year?
that's where the play calling comes in. And a running back, a really good running back, can make an offensive line look good. And as can a quarterback who have – and that. But then you've got the play calling comes into that. You got to roll them out. You know, the horizontal passing game that I hate comes into play, a lot of that stuff. But they don't have, my thing is, the one thing Michigan State had was the guy who touched the ball was a difference maker. They've got to have the guys who touch the ball, including the punter and kicker, have to be difference makers next year. They have to score touchdowns. They have to deliver. They have to produce. Not great. They don't have to go 9-3. They got to go. 7-5 would be pretty good. I mean, they've got to go to a bowl game, and they've got to. I just think if they can find some guys who handle the ball, the difference makers, they used to call them, still do. I mean, this program needs confidence, and the way to get confidence is to deliver every game and score touchdowns, cross the goal line, get inside the 20. The running back scores. He gets the ball, and he scores. And, yeah, you got to block. Sure you do. But I just think they've got to have a guy like the Michigan State running back, because they have to have somebody like that. And I think there's a lot of candidates.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Trey Palmer.
Running backs.
Maybe he's the guy that crosses the goal line. I'm just saying, somebody needs to infuse confidence into this program that we can do it. It's going to happen, it's not going to happen. That's where they are right now. It's not going to happen. But they need somebody to step up and go, it's going to happen. Maybe that's Whipple. Maybe he calls plays like a swashbuckler, and it all works out. and it's like,
maybe.
Because he doesn't care. This is the end of his career, and he's going to be bold. He's hopefully smart. And, Casey Thompson, I'm anxious to see it. I really am.
We'll see. I don't know. It could be Casey. It could be Chubba.
Well, sure. It could be either one.
I think they wanted a little bit more out of Thompson in spring camp. I don't know. We'll see. And I still don't like the way that they pulled him from the spring game. I think he should have played way more in that game than he did. He wasn't going to get hurt. But so it goes. I think we're going to get out on that.
Yeah.
We will be back next week to recap the recruiting week, maybe talk a little bit more football. I don't know. Maybe it's time to talk some of the opponents next week. I've done enough of these recaps, and I'm probably going to be reaching out to Oklahoma here soon and seeing what's up with Brent Venables. But we'll be back next week. For Tom and Evan, I'm Sam McKewon. This is the Pick Six Podcast. Thanks for listening.